From Journey with VRD, you're listening to the Visions, Missions, and Manifestations podcast, the number one place for spirituality, healing, and transcendence. I'm your host, Vivian Raquel Dayan. Now let's get into it. Atarah, welcome to the Visions, Missions, and Manifestations podcast. This is so exciting to have you here. It's such an honor and one of my favorite manifestations to date. Many people know you from your music to Be Magnetic, as well as the Seed Level, which is your unique mindset program where you instill members with the motivation to achieve the things they want in life without experiencing the internal conflict, self-doubt, or fear, which is a blurb I took from your website. But what most people don't know is the life-changing impact you had on me back in June 2022. First and foremost, I want to say thank you. Thank you for giving me a hand when my whole life, my sense of self was in shambles. Thank you for creating space for me on your very busy calendar on such short notice when I could barely speak a word at the time. That moment alone was a huge dose of medicine my mind needed in order to shift from the narrative that I was worthy of punishment, deserving of nothing good, and a hateable person that had to fight to prove myself in order to be liked. Loved was out of the question. You making space for me was the first trigger that made me realize that maybe, just maybe, I was the one allowing myself to be surrounded by people who kept this narrative going. In session with you, I remember I could barely speak, and yet we had breakthrough after breakthrough. And now, 2 years later, that woman who came to you lost a voice, too scared to talk out of fear of people judging her, hating her, is using her voice now more than ever to help others break free of the fears holding them back from being free. Atarah, I don't mean to toot your horn all hour, but from the bottom of my heart, you are an incredible person, someone I learn from every day through your Instagram and through your stories and all your messages that you post. So I wanted to kick this podcast off by asking you, what's your story? How did you get here? How did you become this incredible person that you are today?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for everything that you just said. Because in what I do, I'm so focused on the person sitting across from me that there's not a lot of opportunity for me to receive that back. So that really, really, really meant a lot to me. Really meant a lot to me. Thank you. And that's really why I do this. Everything that you just said was my life story. Everything you went through, I went through to some degree, as I know, I share so much about this stuff. What's been so interesting is how quickly our life can change when we start paying attention. Did you think this is what you were going to be doing 2 years from where I saw you, right? Probably not from that mindset, right? And now look at what you're doing with yourself and with your experience and with your life. And it's really no different from me in the sense that, when I grew up, I was always looking for understanding because I thought I was amazing, but the world very quickly told me that I wasn't. Stuff in my family, with my peers, it felt like the whole state of New Jersey didn't accept me. So I had a lot of resistance. And the things that I was naturally good at were the things that I was criticized for. So I managed to suppress all of that and try and be what people wanted me to be. And I say, fortunately, that didn't work for me because people would still come at me. So I kind of was put in this position, well, being myself isn't working. Being who I think people want me to be isn't working. So maybe I'll just try and do what I want to. And I kind of plugged into this very rebellious part of myself that was, okay, well, I walk down the street, and every time I walk down the street, someone has a name to call me or throwing something at me from their car, or right, this is what it was like growing up. And plus I got that from my stepdad, constantly commenting on my sexuality and calling me a girl. And there was just so much abuse that I dealt with throughout my life that I got to a point where I just felt like I was breaking, and it happened very, very early. And I know I've commented on this before, but I don't think people understand the depth of emotion that kids feel. We look at children and we think oh, they're just a kid, and we think we're shaping them and molding them, but they have their own experiences. And we really do begin to understand who we are at such an early age. And I 100% had that. And as a result of feeling so rejected for just being myself, the first time I tried to take my own life, I was in 3rd grade. That's young, right? And it happened because everywhere I went, it just felt like I wasn't safe. And I was raised Catholic. I was in CCD. I'm learning all this stuff about God and I'm asking questions and they're just telling me, and no one can answer anything. And I've always been a curious, inquisitive person. And that's a big part of me that was squashed. Well, you just got to have faith. And I was like, yeah, but how do you just got to have faith. And if you don't, you're going to go to hell. And this, and like, that's what I learned. Right. So it just felt like there was always something wrong with me. And so I would pray at night and I would just say, and I'd be crying and I'd say, like, God, like, just please, I don't want to wake up tomorrow. Third grade, right? We don't think about that when we think of a third grader. We think, oh, they're this and they're, they don't have any problems. I had so many problems and those problems followed me throughout my life. And every time I found myself in that scenario again, there's another little bit of myself that was extracted until I was less and less and less until I was really nothing. And I was really a shell of a person. And that's kind of what led me on this journey. And this has been lifelong. But because I was so afraid, because I was so small, because I had no sense of self, I got wrapped up into things that were awful, people that I thought were going to heal me or help me, who were really extorting money out of me and preying on my vulnerability, even big organizations, right? That I'm not going to mention, but right, who'd be like, well, you had this dream and you got to pay us $2,000 or something really bad is going to happen, but we can't say what it is. And I was like, terrified. And mind you, I made $2,000 a month at that point in my life. I was really struggling. I was living in a studio apartment in New York with two other people, three of us total, right? And I said, well, I don't know what to do. I don't even make this. And they were like, well, if I told you you needed an emergency surgery or you weren't going to make it, you would find the money. And I did find the money. And then the next time I had this, I got terrified again because it was supposed to be corrected. And I went and they weren't even responding to me. So then in my mind, because I was in such a stress response all the time, I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to die. Something's going to happen because I had zero faith in myself. All of my faith was put outside of myself. So much of what I do now, and listen, it's not for everybody because I understand how it feels to have this hope that there's something or someone looking after you, whether that's universe, whether that's God. And it's not that I don't believe in these things. I just don't believe in personifying these things. Like they did their job, everything already exists. What are you going to do about it? Right. And a lot of people don't like that perspective because for me, it's empowering. But for a lot of people, it's a lot of responsibility because it means you have to take accountability for the quality of your life. And people still want to blame someone or something and think that something or someone else is going to look after them and create some kind of opportunity. But opportunities are created by us, right? So for me, so much of what I do is, and it's not to take people out of their faith, it's not to change people's belief system as far as how interconnected the world is, because we know that that's also the truth. But it's for people to understand the part that they play in it and to find power within that instead of feeling like they have to take everything that they've learned to put aside and continue to put it aside and show up as who they think they're supposed to be in order to get results. And I'm sorry, that's just not good enough for me. And it's not good enough for my clients.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to label what brought you here into any one word because it's a very dynamic story and a dynamic experience that you've had. But there are some things that I definitely want to crack open. For example, growing up Catholic, growing up the way that you did, it sounds like it's something that could be really triggering, but it's
Mhm.
also something that I wonder what your perspective is around manifesting and crossing off the goals on your list. So, how do you change the perception around faith when it comes to manifesting and creating the life that you want?
Yeah, I don't think they're interconnected, right? A lot of people aren't going to like that, but that's the truth, right? Because you said something interesting. You said manifestation and achieving a goal. They're the same exact thing, right? That's the truth. I'm about to launch I'm calling it pragmatic manifestation because it's manifestation work with no mention at all of the universe. Because it's important, right? Because what I found with so many people, and part of the reason I stopped teaching manifestation, right? Even though I'm so grateful for my time at To Be Magnetic, I really believe in the work and the company, and it's a great fit for so many people. However, the particular client that's drawn to me had a very similar backstory to me. We're people pleasers. right? And most people don't even realize they're people pleasers. Most people don't even realize they're codependent, right? But I would argue most of us are raised to please, right? It's about everybody else's needs. Be a good girl because your dad had a long day. You better be nice to so and so at school. You're not going to have any friends. You got to do this or your teacher's going to be upset with you, right? That's how most of us were raised. We didn't have this, really conscious parenting when I was growing up, right?
Mhm.
So it's really easy to then take all of that codependency and those people pleasing tendencies, right? And programming and project it onto the universe and go, oh my God, the universe is testing me. Like, oh my God, am I good or am I bad? What do I have to do? What do I have to, right? Like you're the problem. But the truth is, how I view manifestation is everything's a relationship. Whether you want to talk about God, the universe, whatever your ideology is, whatever that thing is that none of us really know, already created everything that's in existence. Is that not enough for everybody? Right? Even right, even science is just discovering stuff that already exists and giving it a name, right? We're human beings. We still don't know all of this stuff. We only learned 18 years ago that the brain is plastic. And at 18 years old, you're not done and it's not fixed forever, right? We know very little, right? But the truth is, it did its job. Everything exists. What our job is to assess our relationship to what is already there. Because that relationship determines whether or not you can, quote unquote, manifest it, whether or not you can have it, right? It's actually that simple. And that relationship is due to programming, right? Our programming creates our reality. That's what a lot of people don't want to understand. They want to think there's some kind of magical thing that's going to shift everything. You are the magic. You are the magical thing that's going to shift everything if you pay attention to yourself. But it's hard to value yourself and focus on yourself in a society that really doesn't reward that. Right. And even that's why we see all these memes like self-care isn't selfish. Like, how fucked up that we have to make memes like that to defend us taking care of ourselves and prioritizing our needs, right? So when we start to be self-focused, we can look at manifestation a few ways, right? Most manifestation practices are going to tell you, make a list of everything that you want. Seems fair, right? I'd argue most people know what they want actually, right? Which is always an interesting thing when I'm working with people, but let's pretend that they do for this scenario. So we make a list of every single thing that we want. What do you think that's doing to your nervous system?
It would bombard your nervous system. You'd be like, holy shit, how the hell am I going to get it? Like, you're going to be overwhelmed
Totally. And why? Why do you think you're going to be overwhelmed?
because you'll go straight into lack.
Yeah,
I don't have this. I don't have that.
right into lack. And I don't have this. I want this. I don't know how to have this. And so now you have 30 fucking things on a list that you want that you have no idea how to have, because if you knew, you'd already have it, right?
Right.
Talk about an overload. Neuroscience tells us there's no such thing as multitasking, right? When we're multitasking, it means we're doing a bunch of things simultaneously poorly. That's multitasking. So manifestation's no different. So really how I like to teach people how to manifest and my personal practice is, yes, I do make a list of the things that I want. If I have clients who don't know what they want, I have them make a list of everything they don't want or everything they're tired of. Then I have them draw a line and write the opposite. Because what you want is just simply the opposite of what you don't want. We have a negativity bias in our brain. It's helped us evolve, helped us stay alive. So use that as a working off point, but we can't hyperfixate on what we don't want because that's what we'll begin to see around us exclusively. So we want to do an extra step of correcting it. Then what I do is I look at everything that's there and I try to understand what the theme is. And I focus on manifesting the theme. Does that make sense? So for me, I launched a subscription model. It's been doing well. Whenever I talk about it with people, they're like, oh my God, I can't believe you have X amount of people. I can't believe this. Like everyone seems very impressed by it. But for me, like I don't rest on my laurels. I'm grateful for what I have. But I also do have a bigger picture and a vision of where I want to end up and what that looks like. And I spend a lot of time plugging into that and understanding that. But there's where I want to be and where I am. So to bridge that gap, I had to look at everything I want and kind of condense it down into a theme. Because listen, I could say, okay, I want, several 100,000 followers on my social media channel so I can access more people. I want to get X amount of people in my subscription model because then that means I can lower the monthly rate to this and it's even more accessible to people, right? I want to get a book deal. I want to show up as an expert on TV shows. I want to contribute more to, articles that are being written and put in quotes and stuff like this, right? I know all of this and I know why I want this, which is also important. However, that's all outside of me. I have zero control of when that can happen. So the theme that I focus on is increasing visibility. That's 100% where my mindset is. Does that make sense? Right? Because increasing visibility, I understand exactly what that means. I understand exactly what I have to do. So every morning I wake up and I write a list of the things I'm going to do that day to increase visibility. Even if it's something that doesn't seem connected, I logically connect it because my brain has to know that this is the most important story for me. This is the most important thing that I want to find, value tagging. So even my workout, when I make my list, I write that. How is me going to the gym increasing visibility? Because the more I work out, the more confident I feel in my body, the more I want to put myself out there. Even if it's cleaning my house, how is cleaning my house increasing visibility or connected to it? Because I'm creating a really stable, safe, beautiful environment for me to work in. So all of my focus can go on what I'm building and I don't have to worry about a pile of anything anywhere. That's our job. That's really teaching our brain how to show up for us because our brain's going to want to go to scarcity of, oh, well, we don't know this and we don't know that. And this is what we should be afraid of. And this is why we should stay in our comfort zone. That's the automatic process, right? We have to stay conscious enough to keep telling the brain, that's not what we want to do. It's this. No, when this happens, I don't get stressed. I come into my body. No, when this happens, I don't shrink. I learn and I move forward. That's our job. And that's actually how we manifest. Without the universe, we change our relationship to the thing that we want. If that relationship is based in fear, we're probably not going to be able to manifest that. If it's based in lack, we're probably not going to be able to manifest that. And even if we do, when we get there, we're not going to be able to receive it because everything that we put onto it and expected to be there, the feelings we wanted to be present, are already going to be pushed over to the next thing because it's not about the thing, it's about us.
I can't wait to actually listen to this because there's so much notes that I want to put down. Hey there, it's Vivian, and I'm briefly interrupting this podcast episode to share with you that this episode, episode 23, is a season 1 finale of the Visions, Missions, and Manifestations podcast. Oh my God, I am so excited. This is huge, a huge manifestation come true. Thank you all for listening, engaging, and allowing us to come back even bigger at the end of October 25th, with season 2. We have amazing guests lined up, so stay tuned. In the meantime, you can stay up to date with all the Journey with VRD news at our Instagram, Journey with VRD, or through our WhatsApp community chat. And lastly, through our email list. Be sure to be subscribed to get all the fun stuff, all the manifestation tips, tricks, and news. And I'll see you shortly. In the meantime, DM me on Insta, email me, blow up my inbox, and let's stay connected. Now, back to the episode. I do want to crack open power because we talked about people pleasing. We talked about our relationship to the things that we're calling in. And when we work on our relationships, even with things, not necessarily people, there is a sense of power we gain. And I want to hear your outlook on power and ego versus a healthy form of power and what that looks like.
Actually want to go from this place, right? Because a lot of people associate power with ego. They think power is control. To me, that's not power at all. Power is having complete understanding of yourself and access to whatever parts of yourself you need to operate in whatever situation you're in, right? It's almost a fluidity. Does that make sense? Right? It's not controlling people. To me, power is being able to shift and adjust and change, right? There's a presupposition in NLP that goes something along the lines of the person with the most flexibility has the biggest influence on the system. That's the truth, right? Because the person who's the most flexible is able to adapt and change and learn and grow and work through the system and rise up through the system without putting people down and making people feel bad, because it's not ego based, right? It's experiential. They're there to learn. They're not in this fixed ego mindset where they don't feel super secure. They don't feel like a real leader. They don't, and they're afraid people are going to understand there's this insecurity in their shadow. So they have this persona that's really strong and cold and rigid. So no one even thinks that there's any insecurity available, right? That person's probably not going to do very well, right? And that person's probably also not going to feel good within their quote unquote position of power, because they're going to feel like they're a fraud, right? So for me, so much of the work I do, and a lot of people don't understand this, when we even talk about shadow work, people will look for examples that aren't actually shadow, right? And I saw this so much with clients. They'd be like, my shadow word's fat. That's not your shadow word. That's just a judgment, right? Your shadow word is how you feel in comparison to other people because you feel quote unquote fat. What does that mean? Right? You have to go a step deeper. Not my shadow word is I have a big nose. That's not a shadow word. Does that make sense? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So shadow stuff is usually more behavioral. So how I look at it is this. Let's say someone is incredibly insecure. They have trust issues. They've been hurt in the past. Maybe they learned from a parent that their feelings weren't important. So they look for power through work, right? They're probably an overachiever. They overextend themselves. They don't have boundaries. They just work, and hustle. And that's where the majority of their identity comes from, right? So their persona is that they're these really strong, confident, autonomous, independent self-starters, like they're leaders. But the persona, right? And this is when you see people with really unhealthy relationships to work, where it's like, whoa, that's their whole existence. Because their persona is overcompensating for an unintegrated part of themselves, which is maybe afraid to feel vulnerable, afraid to ask for help, afraid to belong because they don't want to be rejected, right? So they have to overextend through their persona. So when we're integrating the shadow, it's not about, because, some people will say, with shadow work, you're supposed to say, oh, well, yeah, actually, I'm really insecure in front of people that you care about and stuff like this, but that's not the truth, right? What you actually do is you start working on the ways that you're overcompensating and overextending yourself. You start scaling back. That's going to bring up certain feelings that are uncomfortable, that are connected to that shadow. And you learn how to sit with those feelings, how to feel them, how to metabolize and process them, how to show yourself compassion in those moments, right? How to let your nervous system let go of it, because just processing the feeling alone and sitting and crying because you've allowed it to come up is helping it move, right? That's how we integrate our shadow. It's not all intellectual and logical. People want to attach a story to everything. And that's the biggest disservice we do with personal growth is, listen, there's a time for thinking and there's a time for feeling. And a lot of times those two things should not coexist.
My favorite thing you once said, if you feel like you need to cry, or maybe you give yourself space every day to just feel, you'll lay on your bed and you'll just feel it without necessarily trying to figure out why, but allow it to move
Mm-hmm.
through your body. And that
Yeah,
really stuck with me, because I'll have moments where I'll be like, well, why do I want to cry? Or why do I want to whatever? And what I've come to learn is it's just that I'm ready to release whatever's coming out. And it's not necessarily that I have to get
totally.
stuck in the story. And
Yep.
something else I really love that you just said was you really clarified the relationship between, if you want something in life, we have to think about our relationship to it. And also, when it comes to ego and power, we have to think about our relationship to our insecurities and our relationship to our shadow and all of that. So everything really is relationship based.
100%. Even our insecurities. Because what is an insecurity? It's something that you haven't paid a lot of time, energy, or attention to, right? So maybe it was rejected by somebody else, so we suppress it. That's not going to make it go away, right? And every time it's triggered, it actually is compounding on top of it and reinforcing it. So we have to allow ourselves to feel what there's something called, and everyone kind of gets this wrong, right? We hear everyone say, like, we got to bring the body back to homeostasis, right? And we talk about that even when it comes to emotions, but homeostasis is like you're in a really hot room, so your body starts sweating to cool itself down, right? That's how it brings itself back to homeostasis. When it comes to emotions, it's called allostasis, and it's your allostatic load, right? So chances are, if you just feel really overwhelmed to the point that you have to cry, your nervous system has probably reached a high level when it comes to its allostatic load, and it needs a release. Let it release. You don't have to sit there and be like, well, why is this? And why do I want to cry? And oh my God, does this make me weak, or does this make me bad, or blah, 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 blah. Just cry, right? Your body knows better than you do so much of the time, but we're not taught how to connect with our bodies. We don't understand the language of our bodies, right? We don't understand that when we get stressed or we have certain fears, your body is in communication with you all the time. It doesn't mean your body's always right, because sometimes based on PTSD, based on past, there's this idea that there's anxiety or something to be anxious about that is completely false or untrue. But again, pay attention to that, because if you notice you're triggered all the time in groups of people or certain situations and you don't have control over it, your body's telling you that there's a fear that is unprocessed. So you can believe that that fear is in the room with you right now, but that's usually not true, right? Or you can be like, okay, why does this keep happening in these kinds of situations? And you can get curious with it. And that's so much of the work I do with people who have trauma or who have PTSD, because these feelings keep coming up because their nervous system's trying to some degree to let go some of this feeling, but it doesn't have the opportunity to, because we retreat, right? We don't let it process. We're so afraid of what's going to come up. We try and intellectually manage it or put it away, and we never metabolize it as a result. So our nervous system just keeps holding on to it. And then we think a belief and attach that belief to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we just keep repeating that process.
It's a never ending cycle. And so one
Yes.
way that we just covered to release and to break the cycle is to just feel it without putting a whole story and a whole reason to why we're feeling it. And what's something else? What's another piece of wisdom that you could give to the listener who's like, okay, what else could I do to break the cycle?
Yeah, I would say, and people never like this answer. Even my clients are like, but I don't like journaling. And it's like, listen, what you're doing is not working. The problem is overthinking feels productive. Overthinking feels like we're doing something, like, oh, I'm really getting into this. I'm going down this rabbit hole. But you're not. You're actually just creating a state of overload. You're creating a stress response. And then all of your fears and all of that base level programming, all the things you were taught to be afraid of, you begin to see. And now you're troubleshooting past fears in the present moment, right? So I always say, like, what's 3 plus 3?
6.
6, right? Easy. What's 489,153 plus 253,192?
You're asking the wrong girl.
Yeah, but listen, isn't it still just addition? Isn't it still just two numbers being added up?
Yes.
Yeah, but one is much more complicated. Right? It's the same thing with our feelings. Like things that we have resolution around, we can be like, oh, that's not a big deal, right? And just move on. Or we can think about it, oh, actually, maybe this happened and move past. Things that have deep meaning to us or trigger us are much more complicated. We don't have the answers. We don't have the resources, which is why the anxiety is already happening, because we don't have what we need to control it. So simply, just like with that more complicated math problem, if I gave you a piece of paper and a pen and I told you those numbers again, would you be able to figure it out?
Yes.
Yes, right? Why? Because you can see your work. You can add the one number up and carry over the one and then add that up, right? There's a process. And I liken this to, right? And this is what people have to understand. When we get anxious, it's like we're a shaken up bottle of soda. And when we take the time to journal, we're not just writing, we're also reprocessing as we're writing, because we're seeing it, right? And then we're assessing what feels true, what doesn't. It's almost like we're taking the cap off the soda and going like, tss, tss, just letting a little bit of the pressure out. You don't have to figure out everything in your own head. Right? That's why it feels even productive to talk to a friend, because you're getting a difference of opinion. You want, hopefully, if it's a good friend, they tell you the truth, right? If it's, and that's what's complicated sometimes with talking with friends, is because a lot of times they'll tell you, one, what they think you want to hear, or two, what they want to hear. right? What they would want to hear in the situation, which also might be unhealthy, which is why something like a coach or a therapist is a much more balanced way to get proper feedback, unless you fully respect the way your friends are living their lives. But most people are in shitty relationships and then getting shitty relationship advice from friends who are also in shitty relationships. It's like taking financial advice from someone who's bankrupt and completely poor, right?
This
So, yes.
No, this is incredible. This is incredible. And just that analogy alone was like medicine. It just like put so many pieces together for me in my mind. That was amazing. Breaking is so hard because it's so painful. And I'm thinking about, you shared how you attempted to take your life in third grade. And I'm thinking about somebody I know who's gone through similar circumstance, experience. And
Mm-hmm.
I've always questioned, what was it that makes one person find the resources, find,
Mm-hmm.
I won't say hope or faith, but find it in them to pivot versus somebody who hasn't found it or is still looking for it, I should say. What are the gifts in breaking, even for somebody who hasn't tried to take their life, but also
Mm-hmm.
just is going through a very hard time? What are some of the gifts that they could look forward to, you would say?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you the problems with it and the gifts, because a lot of people like to victim blame. I see it a lot. Whenever I talk about victim mentality, people are like, "Oh, people need to get over it. People just want attention. They just want the," and it's like, first of all, is people wanting attention a bad thing? If people feel lonely and disconnected, why wouldn't they want attention? Don't we all want attention and belonging, right? So when I see people criticize people who want attention or people who want support, I immediately see their relationship that they have with themselves. Because if they don't have compassion to people who are outwardly struggling, what does their self compassion look like, right? Because that person's a mirror to them and all of the ways they overlook themselves. Because you'd be like, oh, get over it and this and this. But that harsh voice is probably 10 times worse with their personal experience. Because the truth is, and I'm sorry, and anybody, people don't like when I say this, but it's the truth. Nobody wants to be a victim. People who feel like they're a victim aren't a victim because of a lack of trying. They're usually a victim because they've tried everything that they've known and nothing has worked. That's a really hard place to be. So, how does this tie into breaking or experiencing a rock bottom? A lot of people don't understand. So much of this has to do with the way that we're raised. It has to do, again, with people pleasing. And people don't think they're people pleasers, but they are. Everybody is. I've never sat across from one person who's not a people pleaser. Even a narcissist is a people pleaser because they love bomb people because they want people to think that they're amazing. So they do it in a different way, but they need the fuel and the energy from the other person in order to have a sense of self. Now that people pleasing will end once they have them in the trap, but that's the tactic, that's the hook. So when we're people pleasers, we want a sense of belonging, connection, right? We want value, but we've learned there's conditions around it. You don't have value unless you do this. You get this grade, you do this, you make this much money, right? So we project all of the conditions, right? And all of that value onto something outside of ourselves that we then have to work toward earning. So what are we really motivated by? Guilt and shame, right? We don't want to be rejected. We feel bad about where we are. We don't want to disappoint people. We learn not to let people down because then that means we don't get fed. So when we keep doing these patterns over and over and they stop working for us, and we finally get to that point where we feel like a victim or we feel empty and we don't have any more resources available, it's still hard for us to do anything for ourselves because, again, we have no programming supporting us, telling us how to do for ourselves, how to be for ourselves, because it's always been about other people. We have to cultivate guilt and shame somehow because that is our fuel. So, how do we do that? Right? Negative self talk, procrastination, numbing, avoidance, doing things that make us feel really far away from our timeline until we cultivate and build up enough guilt and shame that we almost feel like disgusted by ourselves, which no one likes that feeling, right? And then once we're disgusted, we do reactive change, I call it. Oh, I'm so tired of feeling like this. I'm going to do this. So we try to do a 180 and we might overcommit. We start, meditating twice a day and doing an exercise in class and doing all of this stuff to make up for lost time. But it doesn't stick because it's too much too soon. We haven't learned anything. We're just trying to move away from what we don't want to be. Does that make sense? Right?
Yeah.
So, so when we break, that's usually what happens, but we're still not being compassionate with ourselves, right? And compassion is the missing piece. And a lot of people have a hard time with this, but without compassion, we can't learn anything because we're still in a fight or a race against time. Because there's this life we think we should be living based on this idea of who we think we should be or where other people are through comparison, right? So we're being motivated by this pressure of not being good enough versus being able to slow down and take full ownership of, okay, look, this is my life. I accept that decisions I've made, whether they were conscious or unconscious, even though I may have tried my best, have created my current reality. We have to take ownership because if we don't take ownership, it's not ours, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have to get curious. Okay, well, why do I feel like this? Where did I learn this? We have to get all this information, take inventory, right? Because for so many of my clients, and this is how I am, and this is how I work with people, we don't go right into hypnosis. We don't go right into the emotional work because their nervous system won't even allow them to access their feelings, right? They shut down, right? And a lot of people like that shows up through ADHD where they have like, they'll like fidget or do things and like all their focus goes to like their thumbs clicking together or their feet tapping because they don't know how to go within themselves. I always do the intellectual work first and take the inventory so people can really see what is not working for them in black and white. We take inventory on relationship dynamics. We take inventory on a relationship to self. We craft this idea or this vision of what we want. We contrast it to where we are. We pull all of the necessary information so that you see with your own eyes why this isn't working. Because once you have that information, you will be more excited and more willing to then learn how to feel your emotions, take these new things on, begin these new practices, begin creating new habits, begin reinforcing them and creating new beliefs, new ways of being. But a lot of people take the fact that they live in their own body for granted. They think just because they live in their body, they know who they are. And most people don't. Most people live their lives how they are or how they've been taught to be, not as who they are. Does that make sense? Right?
That
So,
makes sense.
yes.
Incredible.
Right. And when people break, it's usually a pretty clear sign that you've been overly plugged into the how and you're really disconnected from who.
That's amazing. That's going to be such medicine to so many people. You talked a little bit about having clients who come to you not really knowing what they want. You talked a little bit about how you'll show them, okay, what's not working right now so that they could focus on what is working or what they do want. And so I'm curious to hear why somebody would come to you if they don't know what they want.
Yeah, because listen, we have to look at ourselves as a whole, and a whole that's comprised of multiple parts. And the problem is, right? And I'll do like parts work or internal conflict resolution under hypnosis, where we pull forward all different parts and they kind of have a dialogue. I liken it almost to like a human resources meeting, right?
That's so funny.
Because the issue is, right, for the company of you, right? What tends to happen is the CEO of the company tends to be the most fixed, controlling, fearful, neurotic version of ourselves. And there's very little space for any other identity except for the one way that we see things or want things to be. However, there may be someone, a recent hire in the mailroom, who's on the lowest pay grade, who no one listens to, who has the best ideas to actually grow this company, right? So that's the kind of work we do. And people will say, oh, my inner child is feeling this. So there is an awareness that we have parts inside of ourselves, but if we have an inner child, we also have an inner adult, right? We have a part that might be passive. We have a part that might be rebellious. We have an inner teenager, right? We have parts that are really confident. We have parts that are really creative. We have parts that are lacking. We have parts that are afraid. We have parts that are hopeful, right? Mm-hmm. And it's really about getting all of them to work together by understanding, one, who they are, two, what their job is, and then three, if all of those jobs are working correctly, or if some people need to be reassigned, right? So that's how I like to look at people, because it's easy to be compassionate about a part that feels insecure if you can understand that it's just a part, it's not the whole. But when you start identifying, right, the whole as insecure, that's terrifying because we feel like we can't take care of ourselves. Oh,
It's
so why do people come to me? Yeah, which
yes.
is what you asked. So I think, and listen, I think people come to me for a few reasons. One, it's interesting because I'm such a kind, really gentle person, but I'm also direct, right? Because I'm from New Jersey.
Me too.
People and people come to me first and foremost because I've really worked, not intentionally, like kind of unconsciously. As I've worked on myself, I've shared so much of my personal process, my growth. People have seen my body change at 43 years old, right? From 42 to 43 years old in a way that doesn't normally happen. Like my voice has changed, my tax bracket has changed, my lifestyle has changed, my level of friendships have changed. Like all of it is different. And people have watched me, and those were all exactly who I was in these different moments. And there was still authenticity attached to them, right? But people have watched me progress. People are aware of my background. They're aware of the level of trauma that I experienced. So a lot of people see themselves within my story, right? And our stories are so important, and we get so afraid to share them. But it's the best way to show people what's possible because it's non-threatening. And I never sit across from someone and say, your problem is this because blah, 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 blah. And you need to, because a lot of people get really uncomfortable. They say they want to be seen, but when you actually see them and call it out, they don't like it. So
Mhm.
I put the spotlight on myself by sharing things that are intimate, like in ways that a therapist wouldn't, because we're in a human experience, right? So if I can highlight a struggle or something in myself that I dealt with, because I know you can see yourself within the story, that's one, going to make you comfortable. Two, going to connect. And three, it's going to install a little bit of hope in you because you've watched me work through it. And that's what most people say after the first hour I spend with them, because they'll come in and, a lot of people think I'm like this Dr. Phil, like, well, what's your problem? And I'm going to break your ego and this and this. And it's just not how I work. But it's interesting because I have a directness, people think that's the way it's going to come across in a session, right? And so they'll come in and kind of prepare themselves. And, a lot of my clients are therapists and they're like, I wish I know this person who I wish they'd work with you and this, and who are clients of theirs. And they'll say, but I tell them like, it's going to be an hour, but it's going to be like an hour. Like it's going to be an hour, like an intense hour. There's no fat. It's right to the meat. And that is true, but it's all done with compassion. So a lot of clients, when they finally will get to the point where they come in and want to work with me, will almost prime themselves to be like tough or think they have to be really resilient. And they'll be like, I need you to whip me into shape because I'm lazy and I'm this and blah, 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 and this and this. And like, so what do you think? And they think I'm going to be like, yeah, you're right. Like, you're the worst. And we need to. And the first thing I say is, I think it must be really hard to view yourself this way and to talk to yourself this way.
Mhm.
And they immediately start crying because that's the truth, right? I'm interested in the truth. I think that's why people work with me. There's no fluff, there's no sprinkles, right? It's just we're here to understand you. I want you to understand you. It's my job to ask you questions to do that. I will give input when necessary, but I want most of the realizations to come from your mouth. And it's my job to guide you with the right line of questioning for you to land on that. And then when we land on something important, to be able to really understand these dynamics, how they're affecting us, and then to use hypnosis or NLP or a mental emotional release therapy or any of the tools or modalities that I work with people with to kind of move forward and through.
Okay. So rapid fire. Who is your ideal
Yes.
client?
Well, this is a funny question because I'll tell you my ideal client and my favorite kind of client.
I would love it.
Because it always happens. My ideal client is someone who is really curious about themselves, is really curious about the world. Because to me, curiosity is the best attribute we can possess. Because as long as we stay curious, there's always something to learn, there's always somewhere to grow, right? My favorite client, and they're always the same. They come into the session, they don't fill out the intake form, not a single word. They come in with their arms folded, sitting really far away. Usually the lighting is dim. They act like they kind of don't want to be there, but I know that they do because they booked the session, right? And they'll even, first session, we'll connect. They'll not agree with anything. Next session, they'll come in, they'll be a little bit lighter, but they'll try I didn't do my homework, thinking I'm going to scold them or something, right? And like trying to get some kind of a reaction out of me, right? And I'm like, okay. They're like, well, what do you mean, okay? Aren't you mad? No, I gave you that homework because I thought it was helpful. It's there. Do it if you want to. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. And they just kind of sit there and freeze. And I'm like, do you want to talk about maybe why you didn't do your homework? Right. And then we end up unpacking all of this stuff. I love that client. Those are the clients that I see have the most growth, right? And the reason I love that kind of client is because that client doesn't trust anybody. That client has tried 9,000 different things, 9,000 people, different people, and has ended up disappointed every single time. And I know that they came to me because there's a part of them that is hopeful. And I would say 98% of the time we break through and they end up being really open and we clear all this stuff out and they're really motivated, but we have to work through the fear first, right? Because they're afraid of being disappointed. And I love that because for me, the bond that we are able to create is so special. And I've seen that with a lot of my clients deal with immune disorders. And they've been told, there's nothing wrong with them. They gone to neurologists and doctors and no one takes them seriously. And then they have this hypervigilance to find out what's happening. And then it makes their nervous system go out of whack. And then they get more symptoms and they're always down these rabbit holes because they don't feel safe. And they tried going to people to get answers and to find that sense of safety, and no one can help them. And then in a few sessions with me, they're like, oh my God, I feel like myself again. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Because I take the time to understand that. I don't look at people like a therapist does because I don't obviously bill to insurance. I don't have to, look at the DSM-7 and say, okay, you need to have these symptoms so I can bill insurance. Like, I don't look at people like, oh, you're bipolar or you have ADHD or you have this or you have that, because I don't have to. I want to know why that exists. What in your upbringing made your brain wire that way or believe that this is how you have to show up? I like to look at the individual because we all have our own experiences, right? Everyone's not one thing. And I don't believe that we get a diagnosis and we have to be stuck in that trap forever. I think everything is a working off point if we can actually look at people as people. I have limited bandwidth, obviously, with one-on-one, which is why I created my work. But I try to really motivate people to want to be curious like that with themselves. Because if you can do that, you are unstoppable because you don't have to judge how you're showing up. You're always asking why. You're always looking for information and trying to learn from that information. To me, that's my favorite kind of person. Just curious. Curious. I think it's just the best way to be.
If you were able to go for dinner and have a conversation with anybody, dead or alive, fictional or real, who would it be and why?
Ooh.
I need to know
Probably
who
Carl.
Atarah is having dinner.
Yeah, probably Carl Jung, right? And I wouldn't even have a conversation. I would just listen.
I love
Right.
that.
I would say that's it. I don't put people on platforms really. I've met a lot of people that I idolized and they're just people. Like idolized when I was a kid. I'm like, oh, you're a person, right? But I just find him fascinating. And then I'd say another person who I get to have real life conversations with is my friend, Dr. Tara, who I think is just brilliant. And we just connect on such a deep level. And I love her. Yeah.
That's so lucky that you have that in your life. What is your favorite manifestation that you've ever brought into your life? And what is one that you hope to have soon or create soon?
I mean, I would say my entire life here was my biggest manifestation. I, was a struggling musician in New York. Um, I always made things as nice as possible for myself, or tried to at least. But in the past few years, everything I've wanted has happened, right?
Mm.
And even just recently, like I started contributing to Mind Body Green, like my first ever article that I wrote, and it was a draft and they published it without any notes. Like that was amazing. My community, that's the most important thing to me right now. And I think that's closest to my heart is building this brand out and building the community and just getting to work with people and seeing people support each other in real time. And yeah, like I'd say getting to this place, because so much of my energy in the past has been making other people great and other people's businesses great, and coming in and doing consulting. And I learned so much working with TBM and created a lot of the workshops and helped with their rebrand. And after that, I was consulting with the app The Pattern, and trying to bring more humanity and interaction into that. And that was really fun. And I just kind of hit this point. I'm like, I should just be doing this 100% for myself. And in doing that and having my business be so successful, that just feels amazing. Um, but I just want this to be in everybody's hands. That's really my goal, is it to be just accessible for whoever needs it, because so much of the wellness industry, and I know this is a rapid fire, but from New Jersey, so you know how much we can talk, but
It's a good, it's all good. I love it.
yeah.
So much wisdom here.
For me, it was interesting. So when I launched my brand, I met with so many marketing people and teams and friends who are in marketing, and every single person's like, do high ticket, less people, high ticket, $3,000, and you work with them for 6 weeks. And I was just like, but that's not my client. Like, rich people have enough things available to them. Like, I don't want to charge people like what some people don't even make in a month to work with me for 6 weeks, right? Like, I'd rather have low ticket stuff. It doesn't mean it's not good quality. It means I actually care about people and I want people to have good things, right? And even that, if we come from a manifestation perspective, there would be a part of me before that's like, oh my God, but if I'm making this much, that means this, or if I'm charging this much, that must mean, and I just don't care about that. It's irrelevant to me. It's unimportant. So just the sense of self and the level of integrity I'm able to maintain in my process of creation and with my community is also a really big manifestation, because I'd say the majority of my life, I was a chaser, right? And I was trying to shape myself into all of the, spaces that I thought I'd be successful in, being who people wanted me to be. And I just have zero of that anymore. I'm always 100% myself. Still always open to learning and trying different things and doing better and expanding. But I genuinely love people and connecting with people, and that's my motivation.
And I also love how well that mirrors what you were talking a little bit about before when it comes to people pleasing. It's like instead of making others more successful and, better, you're focusing on yourself and filling up your own cup. So I really love how beautifully that played with that.
Thank you.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. I was going to say, and what's cool about it is it just reminded me of something, because it's interesting as like a personality who has like an Instagram and like, and as a content creator, you don't really interact with people in real life, right? Even my work, I do everything over Zoom. And it's interesting because whenever I meet people in real life, I was at a dinner the other day, like a corporate dinner, and this woman came up to me and she's like, you help me so much. I watch your Instagram every single day. And she's like, and I've just been watching you this whole dinner. And she's like, you genuinely just care about people. And she's like, I've been watching you like make eye contact with everyone, even people who are like far across the table, just to connect and just to this. And she's like, it's so cool. Like, you're so present and you're so here. And I'm like, thanks. Because like it is like it's 100%. And I've done so much work to be that way, because before I'd say to them, be like, oh my God, what do people think of me? How do I look? And do I sound stupid? I was the exact opposite. Right. So it's cool for me to also get this feedback from people, because it helps me chart my own growth. because when it's you, you don't even realize the shifts are happening so much.
Yes, yes. And what would you say is your superpower, your spiritual superpower, or your sixth sense?
I'm going to say this without sounding woo-woo. Because
It's
I'm
all
not
good.
here for the woo-woo. But I'll say, okay, I'm really good at knowing, and I'm really good, and this is 100% a trauma response. I used to always say, like, being calm is my superpower, right?
Mm.
When the worst things have happened around me, I'm like, okay, take a breath. This is what we're going to do. This is like, I mean, crazy. Like, I had a friend who had a shock trauma recently. I really crazy situation. Um, and I picked them up and I worked with them for 2 hours straight and was able to stay guide, right? My husband's been diagnosed with cancer 3 times over the past few years. Like, every time, okay, this is what we do. This is this, right? And I used to think that was a really good thing. But as I did work around it, I realized it was a trauma response. Because growing up, my stepdad would say, if I would get emotional after watching him, abuse my mom or do something crazy, he'd get in my face and point. And I was a really small, like, little petite kid, and just aggressively point in my chest with, like, veins popping out of his neck and bloodshot eyes. And he'd be like, do you want something to cry about? Do you want me to give you something to cry about? And I remember I hated that question so much because it made me feel like it was delivered like I had a choice, but I didn't have a choice, right? Because if what I just saw wasn't worthy of crying over, I didn't want to find out what was. So I learned how to shut down my emotions, right? And I used to be, calm is my superpower, calm is my superpower. Now I still have access to it, but I make sure after the fact that I take time to process all of the stress or anxiety that I suppressed in that moment,
Mm.
so I don't hold on to it. So that's what I would say to some degree. My new one is, because I do so much NLP and so much visualization work with people, and because I'm so present, I really see the chain of events that are going to unfold. And an example of this was even at my workout. The other day, I saw this guy and he was doing a chest press on the flat bench. And I saw him lay down and go back, and I saw his glasses slide out. And I got this flash of, like, a picture immediately of him throwing his weight and his glasses going down, like, so vivid. And I looked over and I was going to say something, but he was pushing, like, really heavy weight, and I didn't want to, like, have him screw up his rotator cuff, or I just couldn't say anything in the moment. And I watched, and the same exact thing happened. And then I saw him pick them up, and glasses were kind of destroyed. He was bending them. And I said to him, I'm so sorry. I knew that that was going to happen, but I didn't want to, like, interrupt you in your set because you were lifting really heavy. And he goes, I can't believe I put my glasses in such a stupid place. And I said, you didn't. They slid out of your pocket. I said, so at least if that makes you feel better, then, like, my work here is done. And he's like, thank you. It does, actually, because I was judging, like, how irresponsible I was by putting it there. So I would say I'm really good at understanding how things are going to unfold, especially for people, based on patterns, behaviors, the way that they talk, their physiology. I'm so observant that I notice even the smallest changes when I'm working with people, when I'm with people, so I can really kind of see how things are going to happen, but
And
not in a psychic way. It's just FYI, because I'm not woo woo. It's just literally, I just understand from paying attention.
love it. Great clarification. And
Yes.
was there ever a book that changed your life or really impacted you in a positive way when it comes to who you are now? And would you share it if there is one?
I mean, how much time do you have? Yeah, I would say there's a handful. There's a book, obviously, The Source by Dr. Tara, I love.
Mm.
There's a book called Mind Magic. That's amazing. More about kind of more my approach to manifestation. The guy was a neurosurgeon, I believe. So it's coming from that perspective. There's a book called Widen the Window, that's all about kind of moving through trauma and using mindfulness. God, so many. There's what are my initial ones? I used to always like The Alchemist. That's fiction, but I think it's such a beautiful story. The Untethered Soul was a book that I just found like so beautiful and have read 9,000 times. There's a book called A Clinician's Guide to Mindfulness that's really good. I've read 9 million books on Zen, 9 million books on shadow work. I read all the time. I'm like reading 4 books right now. That's who I am.
No, this
But
is
yeah,
great. This is
lots of
great.
books.
Thank you. And I guess the
Homecoming
last,
by John Bradshaw
oh,
for inner
that's great.
child work is great also. Yeah.
I love home. Yes, I've read a couple of those. We'll close off with this last question. If somebody wants to find you on Instagram or they want to work with you, where can they
Mhm.
find you? What's your Instagram handle, your website name? Give us the juice.
Yeah, so a couple of things. People can't work with me because I've kind of closed that off. I have I have a subscription model now, and there's a tier that's invite only. People can apply to a wait list to come in. It's actually a really great deal. It's less than I used to charge for a session, and you get the work and you get a group call. But I'm only seeing a small amount of clients a month now because I'm so built on creating tools and all this stuff. So theseedlevel.com is my website. But what's exciting is I have a free workshop, ironically, that we talk so much about power, called Reclaiming Your Power. So you could link that for anyone who's listening and they can access it for free, no strings attached, for 2 weeks. They won't need any longer to go through the workshop. It's based in shadow work. You take inventory on all the places you're spread too thin. You look at shame and how it's motivating these behaviors, what you're doing because of it, what you're not doing. And then there's a self-hypnosis that's all about like essentially feeling the pressure around you, cutting the cords, drawing that energy back in, and then using self-hypnosis to see yourself, and mental rehearsal to see yourself showing up and moving forward the way that you want to. So people can get that 100% for free. If you like that, I would love for you to join the subscription model. There are portals around authenticity, people pleasing, personal expansion, numbing and avoidance, and presence. They're all structured as a month to go through. Every day you get a journal prompt. Every week you get a new self-hypnosis. You also get a free monthly group call where I do a live group session with people every month. You get the replay of that. So it's a lot of bang for your buck. There's a support tier for people who are financially struggling for $50 a month, and the full price is $100 if you have the means. But yeah, and then if you're interested in the mastery tier, that's $300 a month, and you get a one-on-one session with me also for an hour.
This is incredible, Atarah.
Thank you.
I'm like so impressed. What's your Instagram handle? Where can people find you?
Just at Atarah Valentine, and thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, and even my Instagram, I give away a lot of things for free. Lots of carousels with free strategies and meditations, journal prompts, videos to get you thinking. I have lessons that I teach. I just want people to be able to do better for themselves. So if the only means of doing that is free content on Instagram, there's really great free content for you. If you want to do deeper work, that's also available. My DMs are always open if anyone has any questions. And yeah, I love what I do.
I love what you do too. I'm so grateful that you exist. And if there's one, if there's one question that you wish I asked that I didn't, what is it?
I think you ticked all the boxes. I
Okay.
mean, I'm not a person who ever comes from a place of like, oh, I wish this. Like, I'm here for the experience. I've been plugged in this whole time. I've loved every question that you've asked, and zero corrections.
That's the podcast. That's the show. Hey, if you like this podcast episode, please download it, give us a nice review, and follow us on Instagram at Journey with VRD to get all the latest and the greatest updates. Till next week.